Brazil's Covid-19 death toll has now surpassed 11,000 deaths, with 155,000 confirmed cases in the country. But the nation's president, Jair Bolsonaro, has slammed state governors for implementing lockdowns. And when asked recently for his response to the record number of COVID deaths, he simply replied, "So what?" The British medical journal, the Lancet, says the president is, quote, perhaps the biggest threat to Brazil's ability to successfully fight the virus. Gustavo Ribeiro is a journalist and founder of the news website Brazilian Report. He joins us from Sao Paulo. Gustavo Ribeiro, welcome to RM Breakfast.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Jair Bolsonaro is at odds with his advisors, with his and scientists over COVID-19. He says the virus is no worse than the flu, or to put it in his words, it's just a measly cold. What is the situation there in Brazil? How catastrophic has the virus been for Brazil?
We know the situation is pretty bad. We just don't know exactly how bad it is because Brazil has not tested enough. We have tested 33 times less than Spain. In Brazil's second most populated state, we have a backlog of tests of more than 90,000 people. So even though the numbers are continuing to rise, the real figures are, according to some experts, between 2 and 4 million infections. Of course, those are estimates, but the signs that we are under-reporting cases are everywhere to be found. And the thing is, the Ministry of Health has already admitted that Brazil is, quote, flying blind through this crisis.
Okay, so in terms of, as I said, the official recording of cases is 156,000. You're saying it's likely to be much, much more. Who's carrying out the testing, and is the president interfering with an adequate testing regime, or are the states just going it alone?
Brazil's health system is highly decentralized, so states and municipalities are responsible for carrying out these tests. However, the Ministry of Health should be centralizing distribution of tests, and they promise some million tests to states and municipalities, and they have only delivered 15% of the rapid tests they promised. They have not been passing funds or equipment to states. So even though it's not the federal government's direct responsibility, they could be doing much more to ensure that states are capable of running tests and of taking care of the overflow of patients they are receiving right now.
If you look at the number of deaths recorded already, it comes down to an average of 232 deaths per million, which compares very unfavourably to most other parts of the world. I mean, that is a high death rate already.
Exactly. And the thing is, the number of deaths by undetermined causes has skyrocketed in several places in Brazil. In Rio de Janeiro, last month, the number of deaths by undetermined causes was 3,000% higher than in 2019. So that indicates that the real number of deaths might be much higher than those figures that we have confirmed right now.
Let's look at the attitude of your president. As I mentioned, the Lancet medical journal described Bolsonaro as perhaps the biggest threat to Brazil's ability. I mean, his attitude is extreme, even compared to some others around the world. He's actively encouraged people to defy social distancing measures that some of the states have had lockdowns in them. He's actively defied people to come out against them. He's saying people are going hungry at home, therefore they should get out and work. And he's accused the media and scientists of exaggerating the risks of the virus. In fact, he's going out in public, he's not wearing a mask, he's socialising. What impact is that messaging from the president, that kind of attitude from the president, having on how people are responding on the streets?
He has a direct impact in social distancing rates because some scientists, they did a study correlating public addresses by Jair Bolsonaro encouraging people to leave their homes with a decline in compliance with social isolation guidelines. Because like you said, some states have enacted lockdowns, but we just have a handful of states, and even in those states, the lockdown measures are in specific metropolitan regions. So in most of the country, is actually upon citizens themselves to make the decision. And while commerce is shut down, the decision to leave home is up to people, because we don't have a forceful lockdown. We have social distancing guidelines, not imposition. So the president has been the face of COVID-19 denialism, not in Brazil, but in the world, I would say. And since he has a very engaged core of supporters, what he says has a true impact in how people behave.
And is that changing at all as people see people get infected by the virus, people dying from their virus, presumably those they love dying from the virus? I mean, I noticed that Bolsonaro really ramped it up just last week, planning a huge barbecue. He's going to have a barbecue and a kickabout. He's really, he's really thumbing his nose at this and those who are urging caution. Is public opinion changing at all as Brazil is seeing the health impacts of this virus?
Yes, he has lost about 8 percentage points in his popularity rate, in his approval ratings. But Bolsonaro, we see a strange phenomenon with him. He has consistently been the least popular leader in Brazilian democratic history, but his approval ratings never change. So like Donald Trump in the US, he's less popular than predecessors, but the approval ratings fluctuate not that much. Now, what we start to see is the erosion of his base, because Brazil's economic conditions are worsening a lot, and we are facing a job apocalypse in Brazil, with some estimates pointing out to up to 40 million people out of a job here, which would be up to 35–40% of the workforce. So that is what is going to decide whether or not Bolsonaro can cling on to his support base. Right now, however, we don't see a lot of public pressure against his administration, in the sense that the people who are against Jair Bolsonaro are the very people who are abiding by social isolation guidelines. So they're not on the streets protests. The streets are Bolsonaros.
He did get criticised, I understand, in the papers on the weekend for the so-called barbecue of death. And his critics point out he's having barbecues, he's socialising, he's riding jet skis, but he's not visiting hospitals, he's not going to meet the frontline medical workers, he's not meeting with the families of the thousands of Brazilians who have died. What's his response to that?
Well, the administration issued a statement bashing the press, which is not necessarily news when it comes to Bolsonaro, but their message was quite shocking, in the sense that they said the president is trying to save lives, and that, quote, work will set us free, which of course reminded a lot of people of the messages that were in the portal gates of Nazi concentration camps. And we have to remember that as recently as January, his culture secretary was fired because he paraphrased Joseph Goebbels. So this kind of reference in an administration like Bolsonaro's does not come lightly,
Yeah. Gustavo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Gustavo Ribeiro is a journalist and founder of the news website Brazilian Report.